Empires are not born from comfort. They rise from exile, from hunger, from the restless mind of a leader who refuses to accept the borders drawn by fate. Across the windswept valleys of Central Asia, beneath skies that carried the dust of collapsing kingdoms, a young prince looked toward lands he did not yet possess. His inheritance was not secure territory, but ambition. His legacy would not be simple dominion, but transformation. This is the story of the Mughal Empire, an empire forged between memory and conquest, between Timurid nostalgia and Indian possibility. And at its beginning stands a question that would shape 2 centuries of history. Could a displaced warrior from the steppes build a dynasty in the fertile plains of Hindustan? In the late 15th century, Central Asia was fractured. The great Timurid Empire of Tamerlane had splintered into rival principalities. Among them was the small kingdom of Fergana, ruled by the descendants of the conqueror who had once terrorized Persia and India. In 1483, in the town of Andijan, a child was born into this volatile inheritance, Zahir-ud-Din Muhammad, later known to history as Babur. He was a Timurid on his father's side, a descendant of Tamerlane, and through his mother he claimed lineage from Genghis Khan. His blood carried legends of conquest. His reality would be constant struggle. At the age of 12, Babur inherited the throne of Fergana after his father's sudden death. Adolescence did not shield him from politics. Nobles tested him. Relatives betrayed him. Armies threatened him. His first ambition was Samarkand, the glittering jewel of Timurid glory. To possess it was to legitimize himself as heir to his ancestors' grandeur. At 15, he captured the city. Within months, he lost both Samarkand and Fergana. Exile became his teacher. For years, Babur wandered between fragile alliances and failed campaigns. He wrote candidly in his memoirs, the Baburnama, about despair, betrayal, and fleeting triumphs. Few conquerors have left behind such intimate testimony. He was not merely a warrior but a reflective observer of landscapes, gardens, and human character. This duality, sword and pen, would define the empire he later built. By 1504, unable to reclaim Samarkand permanently, Babur turned southward. He crossed the Hindu Kush and seized Kabul. Afghanistan offered him a new base, but not the empire he envisioned. From Kabul, he looked toward Hindustan, the rich plains of northern India, then ruled by the Lodi dynasty of the Delhi Sultanate. The Lodis were Afghan rulers presiding over a fractious nobility and uneasy provincial governors. Their authority, though formidable, was not unassailable. Babur's first raids into India were exploratory. He tested defenses, studied terrain, and assessed loyalties. The subcontinent presented a different world from Central Asia. Lush rivers, vast populations, fortified cities, and a political culture shaped by centuries of Turkic, Afghan, and indigenous rule. Yet it was also divided. Regional powers competed. Rajput confederacies asserted strength. The Delhi Sultanate faced internal dissent. Babur sensed opportunity. In 1526, the decisive moment arrived. Ibrahim Lodi, the Sultan of Delhi, marched north with a massive army and war elephants. Babur advanced from Kabul with a smaller but disciplined force. At Panipat, the two armies met. Babur deployed tactics unfamiliar to many Indian commanders. Field artillery arranged behind defensive carts chained together, matchlock musketeers positioned strategically, and mobile cavalry executing flanking maneuvers known as chalugma. The thunder of cannon shattered the battlefield's rhythm. War elephants panicked under explosive assault. Ibrahim Lodi fell in combat. The First Battle of Panipat ended not only a dynasty but a political era. Victory did not guarantee stability. Babur now controlled Delhi and Agra, but the Rajput leader Rana Sanga of Mewar challenged his claim. In 1527, at Kanwa, Babur confronted a formidable Rajput coalition. The battle was fierce and uncertain. Babur framed it as a struggle of faith and destiny, invoking jihad to rally troops whose morale faltered against Rajput valor. Again, disciplined artillery and cavalry tactics prevailed. Rana Sanga retreated. Babur's position strengthened. Yet Hindustan was not easily subdued. In 1529 at Gagra, Babur defeated Afghan forces attempting to revive Lodi resistance. By then, his control over the Indo-Gangetic plain had consolidated. A new dynasty had been planted in foreign soil. Babur adopted the title Padshah, asserting sovereign authority rather than mere sultanate rule. He sought not plunder but permanence. The Mughal state in its infancy bore Central Asian imprints. Babur introduced garden culture inspired by Persian aesthetics, charbagh layouts symbolizing order imposed upon nature. He valued merit among nobles, though factional rivalries persisted. His court blended Turkic traditions with emerging Indo-Persian influences. Yet beneath these foundations lay fragility. His army remained relatively small. Afghan chiefs resisted. Rajput houses retained autonomy. Babur's health declined after years of campaigning. In 1530, at the age of 47, he died in Agra. Legend holds that he prayed to exchange his life for that of his ailing son Humayun. Whether myth or truth, it symbolizes the precariousness of the new empire. Its founder had conquered, but not yet consolidated. The question remained unresolved. Could the Mughal experiment endure beyond its architect? Humayun inherited both territory and turbulence. Unlike his father, he lacked decisive clarity. He divided provinces among brothers, hoping to preserve harmony but instead fueled rivalry. Meanwhile, an ambitious Afghan leader, Sher Khan Suri, rose in Bihar and Bengal. Skilled, pragmatic, and patient, Sher Khan observed Mughal weaknesses. In 1539 at Chausa, and again in 1540 at Kannauj, Sher Khan defeated Humayun decisively. The Mughal emperor fled westward. Sher Khan proclaimed himself Sher Shah Suri and established the Sur Empire. In a cruel irony within a decade of its founding, the Mughal dynasty was expelled from India. Humayun's exile echoed Babur's earlier struggles. He wandered through Sind and Persia, seeking refuge. The Safavid Shah Tahmasp granted him asylum in exchange for diplomatic concessions. Persian cultural influence deepened in Mughal identity during these years. When Humayun eventually returned with Persian support, he brought not only soldiers but artistic and administrative inspiration that would later flourish under his son. Meanwhile, Sher Shah Suri governed with remarkable efficiency. He reformed revenue systems, standardized currency, improved road networks, notably the Grand Trunk Road, and strengthened administrative oversight. Though his rule lasted only until 1545, his institutional innovations laid groundwork the Mughals would later adopt and refine. Even in displacement, the dynasty's future was being shaped. Humayun reclaimed Delhi in 1555, capitalizing on Sur fragmentation after Sher Shah's death. Yet triumph was fleeting. In 1556, he died after falling from the steps of his library in Delhi. The empire once again stood vulnerable. His heir, Akbar, was only 13. At this fragile juncture, the Mughal story might have ended. Instead, it transformed. Akbar's regent, Bahram Khan, secured victory at the Second Battle of Panipat in 1556 against Hemu, a Hindu general who had briefly seized Delhi. Mughal authority was restored, but its survival was uncertain. Around the young emperor swirled nobles of competing factions, regional powers, and unresolved tensions between conquest and governance. The first chapter of Mughal history is thus not merely a tale of battles won. It is a narrative of endurance, of exile shaping resilience, of defeat teaching adaptation, of ambition refusing surrender. From Fergana to Kabul, from Panipat to exile and return, the dynasty's foundations were laid through instability. Babur's question, whether a Timurid prince could carve permanence in Hindustan, remained open at his death. Humayun's exile deepened the uncertainty. The empire stood at a crossroads between collapse and consolidation. Ahead lay a ruler who would redefine kingship in India, expanding territory beyond imagination and reimagining sovereignty itself. The dust of Central Asian plains had settled upon Indian soil, but would it take root or scatter in the monsoon winds of politics and rebellion? The answer would depend not merely on military force, but on vision, on the ability to transform conquest into legitimacy. As the young Akbar prepared to step from regency into authority, the Mughal Empire hovered between memory and possibility. Its survival would require more than inheritance. It would demand reinvention. Empires rarely survive the vulnerability of youth. They fracture under regencies, collapse beneath factional rivalries, or dissolve in the hands of inexperienced heirs. In 1556, the Mughal Empire stood at precisely such a precipice. Its territories were recently reclaimed, its treasury strained, its nobility divided between Central Asian tyrannies, Persians, and Indian converts, whose loyalties were not yet fused into one imperial identity. Upon this unstable foundation stood a boy of 13, Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar. The question that had followed his grandfather's conquests now returned with urgency. Could this fragile dynasty become more than a foreign occupation? The answer began not with Akbar's direct command, but with the steel resolve of his regent, Bahram Khan. Only months after Humayun's death, a formidable challenger emerged. Hemu, a Hindu general and administrator under the Sur remnants, seized Delhi and declared himself ruler. For a brief moment, Mughal authority evaporated from the capital once more. The symbolism was devastating. If Delhi could be taken so easily, what legitimacy did the dynasty truly possess? On November 5, 1556, at the Second Battle of Panipat, Bahram Khan commanded Mughal forces against Hemu's army. The battle hung in delicate balance until a single arrow struck Hemu in the eye. Leaderless, his army faltered. The Mughals prevailed. Delhi returned to imperial hands. The empire survived its first true crisis. Yet survival was not stability. Bahram Khan governed firmly, sometimes ruthlessly. His dominance bred resentment among other nobles and even tension with the young emperor himself. Akbar matured quickly under these pressures. In 1560, at the age of 17, he dismissed Bahram Khan, asserting personal authority. It was a decisive moment, not merely administrative but psychological. The boy became sovereign. Akbar's early reign was marked by consolidation. He confronted internal revolts, including those of his own relatives. The Mughal court was a mosaic of ethnic factions. Uzbeks, Persians, Afghans, and Indian Muslims competed for influence. Each rebellion tested whether the emperor could command loyalty beyond lineage. Akbar responded with calculated firmness, suppressing revolts while avoiding indiscriminate purges. Gradually, he reshaped the nobility into a service aristocracy bound by rank rather than tribal allegiance. Central to this transformation was the mansabdari system. Each noble received a numerical rank, a mansab, determining military and administrative responsibilities. Compensation came through jagirs, revenue assignments rather than hereditary fiefs. This structure ensured mobility, merit-based advancement, and dependence on imperial favor. Loyalty shifted from clan to crown. While internal consolidation progressed, external expansion began to redefine Mughal destiny. The Rajput kingdoms of Rajasthan represented both military challenge and political opportunity. Unlike earlier conquerors who relied solely on subjugation, Akbar pursued integration. In 1562, he married a Rajput princess from Amber. This was not a mere alliance but a strategic recalibration. Rajput rulers who submitted retained autonomy, entered imperial service, and received high mansabs. Their valor became imperial strength. Resistance persisted. In 1568, Akbar besieged the formidable fortress of Chittor, seat of Mewar under Rana Uday Singh. The siege was brutal. When the fort fell, thousands perished. Yet even in conquest, Akbar recognized the cost of alienation. Over time, most Rajput states aligned with the empire, forming a warrior aristocracy that would serve Mughal campaigns for generations. Expansion moved beyond Rajasthan. Malwa fell in 1561. Gujarat, with its lucrative ports and maritime trade, was annexed in 1573 after swift campaigns that demonstrated Mughal logistical prowess. Bengal, long resistant and geographically distant, was subdued by 1576. Each province extended revenue networks and administrative complexity. The empire was no longer a precarious northern dominion. It stretched across much of the Indo-Gangetic plain. Military success alone could not sustain such breadth. Akbar understood that governance required ideological legitimacy. The Delhi Sultanate had ruled as Muslim sovereigns over a majority Hindu population. Akbar sought something broader, a universal kingship that transcended sectarian boundaries. In 1564, he abolished the jizya tax on non-Muslims. Pilgrimage taxes were lifted. Hindu officials rose to prominent positions. Temples received protection. This policy was not mere tolerance, it was integration. Akbar reframed sovereignty as inclusive rather than exclusive. He invited scholars of different faiths, Sunni, Shia, Hindu, Jain, Christian, to theological debates in the Ibadat Khana at Fatehpur Sikri. These dialogues unsettled orthodox clerics. Akbar's curiosity led him beyond conventional Sunni jurisprudence. In 1579, he issued the Mazar, asserting imperial authority in matters of religious interpretation when scholars disagreed. This move elevated the emperor as supreme arbiter, not prophet, but divinely guided sovereign. Out of these explorations emerged Din-i-Ilahi, often misunderstood. It was less a formal religion than an ethical order centered on loyalty, piety, and moral conduct. Few joined it, but symbolically it declared that Mughal authority rested on spiritual synthesis rather than rigid orthodoxy. Akbar's court became a crucible of Indo-Persian culture. Architecture embodied this synthesis. Fatehpur Sikri, constructed near Agra, blended Persian geometry with Indian motifs. Red sandstone courtyards, carved pillars, and expansive gateways reflected imperial confidence. Though later abandoned due to water scarcity, it symbolized a new imperial aesthetic, neither foreign transplant nor purely indigenous, but something distinctly Mughal. Administrative reforms deepened state capacity. Revenue Minister Rajatadar Mal implemented systematic land surveys and standardized assessments based on crop productivity. The ZAB system stabilized taxation and curbed arbitrary exactions. For peasants, predictability replaced uncertainty. For the treasury, reliable income financed expansion. Akbar's southern ambitions extended toward the Deccan. Though complete conquest would elude him, initial campaigns secured Khandesh and Berar. The empire's frontiers approached a subcontinental scale unprecedented under previous Muslim dynasties in India. Yet power invited tension. Prince Salim, Akbar's eldest surviving son, grew impatient. Court factions formed around succession anxieties. Akbar faced the universal dilemma of empire builders: how to ensure continuity without surrendering authority prematurely. Rebellions by Salim tested paternal restraint against sovereign duty. Despite these strains, by the early 17th century, the Mughal Empire had become a formidable centralized state. Its army combined cavalry tradition with gunpowder innovation. Its bureaucracy integrated diverse elites. Its revenue system supported monumental projects and artistic patronage. Persian became the language of administration, while local cultures enriched courtly life. Akbar's reign, spanning nearly half a century, transformed a fragile conquest into durable empire. He redefined kingship as both martial and moral, both conqueror and conciliator. The Mughal state under him was not merely Muslim rule over India. It was an Indo-Islamic synthesis seeking permanence. When Akbar died in 1605, he left behind vast territories, immense wealth, and a relatively stable succession. Prince Salim ascended as Emperor Jahangir. The empire was no longer an experiment. It was an established power whose legitimacy rested on integration as much as conquest. Yet new challenges loomed. Courtly refinement risked complacency. Expansion strained logistics. Religious tolerance faced future reinterpretation. The question shifted from survival to sustainability. Could the delicate balance Akbar achieved endure beyond his personal charisma? As Jahangir prepared to inherit the peacock throne, the Mughal Empire stood at its zenith of confidence, expansive, prosperous, culturally radiant. But empires are living organisms. They grow, mature, and confront unseen vulnerabilities. The structures Akbar built would now be tested by luxury, ambition. When empires reach stability, they confront a subtle adversary, comfort. The clangor of conquest fades. Administrative machinery hums with predictability. Wealth accumulates, and with it comes refinement. Under Akbar, the Mughal Empire had become a formidable political organism. Under his son, it would become a theater of magnificence, intrigue, and delicate equilibrium. The question now was not whether the empire would survive, but how it would define greatness in an age of abundance. In 1605, Prince Salim ascended the peacock throne as Emperor Jahangir, Caesar of the world. His accession was not without tension. During Akbar's final years, Salim had rebelled, impatient with his father's prolonged authority. Though reconciliation occurred before Akbar's death, the memory of rebellion lingered in courtly whispers. The empire Jahangir inherited was stable, yet it required careful stewardship to preserve the delicate balances his father had crafted. Jahangir possessed qualities distinct from Akbar's commanding presence. He was introspective, fond of art and natural observation, meticulous in judgment, yet vulnerable to indulgence. His memoirs, the Tuzak-i-Jahangiri, reveal a ruler fascinated by flora, fauna, justice, and aesthetics. He saw kingship not solely as conquest, but as cultivated order. Early in his reign, he sought to affirm legitimacy through justice. He famously installed the chain of justice outside his palace at Agra, allowing subjects to petition him directly. Symbolic though it was, it projected an image of accessibility and fairness. Jahangir understood that authority required visible moral grounding, yet challenges surfaced immediately. Prince Khusrau, Jahangir's own son, rebelled in 1606. The uprising drew support from disaffected nobles and even Sikh communities in Punjab. The rebellion was crushed, Khusrau was captured and later blinded. The episode exposed the persistent volatility of succession politics. The Mughal court, though resplendent, remained vulnerable to internal fractures. It was during this turbulent period that a figure emerged who would profoundly shape the empire's political landscape. Mahir-un-Nissa, later known as Nur Jahan, Light of the World. Married to Jahangir in 1611, she became far more than consort. Intelligent, politically astute, and artistically inclined, Nur Jahan gradually consolidated influence within the imperial court. Coins were struck in her name. Farmans bore her seal. She orchestrated marriages, patronized architecture, and navigated factional alliances with precision. Some historians portray Jahangir as dominated by her. Others argue theirs was a partnership. Regardless, the Nur Jahan junta, as it has been described, reshaped court politics. Power radiated not solely from the emperor but from a constellation of familial alliances centered around the empress. While court intrigue unfolded, the empire continued expanding. The Deccan remained a complex frontier. Ahmednagar resisted Mughal authority under the capable leadership of Malik Ambar, an Ethiopian-origin statesman and military strategist. Utilizing guerrilla tactics and exploiting terrain, Malik Ambar frustrated Mughal advances for years. Jahangir's campaigns yielded mixed success, demonstrating that expansion was not inevitable but contested. To the northwest, the empire confronted Safavid Persia over Kandahar, a strategic fortress linking Central Asia and India. Control shifted between powers, underscoring the geopolitical chessboard upon which the Mughals operated. Kandahar symbolized both heritage and vulnerability, a reminder of Timurid origins and contested frontiers. Meanwhile, a new global dynamic approached India's shores. European trading companies, particularly the English East India Company, sought commercial footholds. In 1615, Sir Thomas Roe arrived at Jahangir's court as ambassador of King James I of England. Roe's mission was trade, not conquest. He marveled at Mughal splendor, recognizing the empire's immense wealth and organization. The imperial court, confident in its supremacy, saw little threat in granting limited trading privileges. These early interactions were transactional and cautious. No one at court could foresee how profoundly European maritime power would later reshape India's destiny. For now, trade in textiles, spices, and indigo enriched both sides. The Mughal Empire remained sovereign and self-assured. Culturally, Jahangir's reign marked a zenith of artistic refinement. Mughal miniature painting flourished, blending Persian delicacy with Indian vibrancy and European realism introduced through imported engravings. Portraiture became sophisticated, emphasizing individuality. Nature studies, birds, animals, flowers, reflected Jahangir's personal fascination with the natural world. Architecture evolved with subtle elegance. Nur Jahan commissioned the tomb of her father, Idam-ad-Dawla, in Agra, a precursor to later marble masterpieces. Intricate pietra dura inlay, delicate lattice screens, and white marble construction signaled aesthetic shifts that would culminate in monumental grandeur under her stepson. Yet beneath artistic brilliance lay structural tension. Jahangir's health declined due to excessive consumption of alcohol and opium. Governance increasingly relied on court factions. Succession loomed once more. Among his sons, Prince Khurram distinguished himself through military competence and ambition. He would later be known as Shah Jahan. Khurram initially enjoyed favor but grew wary of Nur Jahan's political maneuvering, particularly her support for another potential heir, Shahryar. Suspicion hardened into rebellion. In 1622, Khurram rose against his father. The conflict stretched across years, draining resources and exposing fissures within the imperial elite. By the mid-1620s, Jahangir's authority had become precariously balanced between personal weakness and institutional inertia. The empire did not collapse, but its stability increasingly depended on the resolution of succession. Nur Jahan attempted to secure power for her preferred candidate, yet Khurram's military strength and noble alliances proved formidable. In 1627, Jahangir died while returning from Kashmir. The empire held its breath. Nur Jahan's faction briefly attempted to elevate Shahryar, but Khurram moved swiftly. By early 1628, he secured the throne as Emperor Shah Jahan. Rivals were eliminated. Nur Jahan retired from political life. Jahangir's reign is often remembered as an interlude between two towering figures, Akbar and Shah Jahan. Yet it was more than a transitional phase. It was a period in which Mughal identity matured culturally and diplomatically. The empire refined its aesthetics, navigated global commerce, and tested the resilience of Akbar's administrative foundations. Under Jahangir, conquest slowed but consolidation deepened. The state machinery proved durable even amid courtly intrigue. The Mansabdari system functioned. Revenue flowed. Provincial governance endured. This resilience would enable the next emperor to pursue unprecedented architectural ambition. As Shah Jahan prepared to ascend fully into imperial authority, the Mughal Empire stood luminous, wealthy, artistically sophisticated, territorially vast. Yet magnificence often conceals strain. Military campaigns in the Deccan and Central Asia would demand immense expenditure. Succession violence had thinned the imperial family, and the seeds of future rigidity lay hidden within growing orthodoxy. Power, when secure, seeks permanence. It carves memory into stone, shapes rivers into reflections of eternity, and transforms wealth into monuments that defy time. Under Shah Jahan, the Mughal Empire would ascend to architectural and aesthetic heights unmatched in South Asian history. Yet the same reign that produced transcendent beauty would also strain the empire's foundations. For in the pursuit of splendor, the cost of empire grows heavy. When Prince Khurram claimed the throne in 1628 as Shah Jahan, king of the world, he inherited a realm stabilized by Akbar's integration and refined by Jahangir's patronage. But he sought not merely stewardship. He sought magnificence. From the beginning, Shah Jahan projected an image of imperial absolutism, distancing himself from factional turbulence and reinforcing centralized authority. His early years focused on consolidating legitimacy. Rivals were neutralized, potential claimants eliminated. The message was unmistakable. Succession ambiguity would not linger. The emperor stood singular, ordained, and unchallenged. Militarily, Shah Jahan revived expansionist vigor. The Deccan remained unfinished business. Campaigns against Ahmednagar, Bijapur, and Golconda intensified. Mughal forces gradually asserted dominance, though complete annexation would elude him. In the northwest, he sought to reclaim Kandahar from the Safavids, launching multiple expeditions. Despite immense expenditure, Kandahar slipped permanently from Mughal control in 1649. The loss symbolized limits to imperial ambition, a reminder that even the grandest empire could not command every frontier. Yet it was not territorial conquest that defined Shah Jahan's reign. It was architectural transcendence. In 1631, tragedy struck. Mumtaz Mahal, his beloved wife and trusted confidant, died during childbirth in Burhanpur. Her death devastated the emperor. Out of grief emerged one of history's most iconic monuments, the Taj Mahal. Conceived as a mausoleum of unparalleled beauty, it embodied not only personal loss but imperial ideology, symmetry, divine order, and the promise of paradise. Constructed over 2 decades in Agra, the Taj Mahal fused Persian, Timurid, and Indian architectural traditions into a seamless vision. White marble replaced red sandstone. Delicate Pietra dura inlay depicted floral motifs with exquisite precision. The central dome rose like a celestial crown above the Yamuna River. 4 minarets framed the structure, perfectly balanced. Gardens symbolized the Quranic paradise. The monument was both tomb and statement. Mughal authority could command art as it commanded armies. The Taj Mahal was not an isolated masterpiece. Shah Jahan reimagined imperial space across the empire. In Delhi, he constructed Shahjahanabad, a new capital anchored by the Red Fort. Within its walls stood halls of public and private audience, adorned with marble columns and jeweled thrones. The peacock throne, encrusted with diamonds and rubies, proclaimed wealth beyond imagination. The Jama Masjid rose nearby, vast and commanding, capable of hosting thousands of worshippers. These constructions were not mere aesthetic indulgences. They articulated a vision of kingship rooted in divine sanction and cosmic order. Architecture became political theology in stone. Economic prosperity underwrote this grandeur. The Mughal Empire commanded vast agrarian revenues. Textile production flourished in Bengal and Gujarat. International trade expanded, with European merchants, Portuguese, Dutch, English, competing for access to Indian markets. Silver flowed into the empire, stabilizing currency and financing projects. Yet prosperity concealed strain. Monumental building required immense resources. Labor was mobilized on unprecedented scales. Provincial governors were pressured to meet revenue targets. The Mansabdari system, though effective, became increasingly expensive as ranks multiplied. Nobles competed for jagirs, leading to administrative inefficiencies and corruption. Meanwhile, the imperial family grew complex. Shah Jahan's sons, Dara Shikoh, Shah Shuja, Aurangzeb, and Murad Baksh, each embodied different visions of empire. Dara, the eldest, was intellectually inclined, fascinated by Sufism and Hindu philosophy. He translated the Upanishads into Persian, seeking spiritual synthesis reminiscent of Akbar's curiosity. Aurangzeb, by contrast, was austere, disciplined, and deeply committed to Islamic orthodoxy. Shah Shuja and Murad harbored ambitions of their own. As Shah Jahan aged, succession tensions intensified. The empire had grown accustomed to violent transitions of power. The question was not whether conflict would erupt, but when. Externally, the Deccan campaigns consumed resources without decisive resolution. Mughal authority extended through vassalage rather than direct annexation. The empire's reach was vast, but its grip required constant military presence. Every frontier demanded vigilance. Culturally, however, Shah Jahan's court represented the zenith of Mughal elegance. Miniature painting continued to flourish, emphasizing imperial ceremony. Court etiquette became elaborate. Persian poetry thrived. Gardens multiplied across the landscape, mirroring paradise in geometric precision. This refinement fostered pride, but also rigidity. The inclusive experimentation of Akbar's era gave way to more formal orthodoxy. While Shah Jahan did not reverse policies of tolerance, his reign subtly recentered Islamic symbolism in court ritual. The balance between integration and identity shifted incrementally. In 1657, catastrophe struck again, not through invasion but illness. Shah Jahan fell gravely ill. Rumors of death spread rapidly. His sons mobilized armies. The war of succession erupted with ferocity. Dara Shikoh, favored heir, commanded imperial forces near Agra. Shah Shuja advanced from Bengal. Murad declared himself in Gujarat. Aurangzeb, calculating and relentless, allied temporarily with Murad before turning against him. Battles raged across northern India. In 1658 at Samuggar, Aurangzeb defeated Dara decisively. Dara fled but was eventually captured, paraded in humiliation, and executed on charges of heresy. Murad was imprisoned and later killed. Shah Shuja's resistance faltered in Bengal. Aurangzeb emerged victorious. Shah Jahan, recovered from illness, found himself confined within the Red Fort at Agra by his own son. From a window overlooking the Taj Mahal, he spent his final years gazing upon the monument built for love, now shadowed by betrayal. In 1666, he died and was laid beside Mumtaz within the marble tomb. The Golden Age had ended not with foreign invasion, but with filial war. Shah Jahan's reign demonstrated the heights to which Mughal power could ascend, and the fragility beneath magnificence. Architectural immortality could not prevent political mortality. Aurangzeb now claimed the throne. Unlike his father's emphasis on splendor, he would pursue moral rigor and relentless expansion. The empire stood at its territorial and cultural zenith, yet fissures had deepened. Financial strain, succession violence, and ideological tension lingered beneath the marble sheen. The Taj Mahal remains a symbol of eternal beauty, but it also marks the turning point of Mughal destiny, where artistic perfection coincided with the seeds of structural overreach. As Aurangzeb prepared to redefine imperial purpose, the Mughal Empire faced a transformation as profound as any conquest. Would discipline strengthen what splendor had strained, or would expansion unravel the delicate tapestry woven across a century? The next chapter would test whether greatness can survive its own ambition. When a titan falls, the earth trembles long after his burial. In 1707, as Aurangzeb Alamgir was laid to rest in a simple grave at Kuldabad, the Mughal Empire remained vast beyond precedent. Yet it stood like a giant whose muscles had grown weary from relentless strain. The emperor's personal authority had held together a realm of immense diversity and mounting tension. Without him, the forces he had suppressed would surge forward. The question confronting the empire was no longer one of expansion, but of survival. Aurangzeb's death unleashed the familiar violence of Mughal succession. His sons Muazzam, Azam, and Kam Baksh vied for supremacy. The ensuing conflict, though shorter than the fratricidal war of 1658, reaffirmed a destructive tradition. Imperial authority was secured only through blood. Muazzam emerged victorious, ascending the throne as Bahadur Shah, already in his 60s, lacked both the time and the commanding presence to reverse decades of structural fatigue. His reign from 1707 to 1712 was characterized by cautious reconciliation. He sought accommodation with Rajputs, reopened dialogue with Marathas, and attempted to stabilize Sikh tensions. Yet his efforts unfolded within a shrinking sphere of imperial control. The Marathas, invigorated by decades of resistance, expanded rapidly under leaders like Shahu and later the Peshwas. Their military system, light cavalry adept at swift raids, exploited Mughal logistical weaknesses. Rather than direct confrontation, they pursued chauth, a system of tribute extracted from Mughal provinces. Imperial authority was increasingly negotiated rather than imposed. In Punjab, the Sikh community transformed into a formidable military force. After the execution of Guru Tegh Bahadur and the struggles under Guru Gobind Singh, the Khalsa fostered unity and militancy. Though Bahadur Shah temporarily subdued Sikh resistance, the movement persisted, gradually evolving into a regional power structure that would later challenge Mughal dominance decisively. Bahadur Shah's death in 1712 reopened succession conflict. Within a year, he was followed by Jahandar Shah, whose brief reign collapsed under factional intrigue. Court politics became dominated by powerful nobles rather than emperors. The Sayyid brothers, kingmakers of the era, elevated Farrukh Siyar to the throne in 1713, only to depose and execute him in 1719 when relations soured. This rapid turnover of emperors signaled a profound shift. The peacock throne, once the apex of sovereign authority, became a pawn in aristocratic rivalry. The Mansabdari system, designed to bind nobles to imperial service, now empowered factions to manipulate succession. Central authority weakened as provincial governors recognized opportunity. In the Deccan, Nizam-ul-Mulk Asaf Jah asserted autonomy, founding the Hyderabad state in 1724. Though nominally loyal to the Mughal emperor, he governed independently. In Awadh, Saadat Khan established hereditary control. Bengal followed suit under Murshid Quli Khan, whose administration prioritized regional interests over imperial directives. These emergent states did not initially reject Mughal sovereignty outright. Instead, they hollowed it from within. Revenues that once flowed to Delhi now remained in provincial capitals. Imperial decrees lost enforcement power. The empire transitioned from centralized dominance to fragmented suzerainty. Economic shifts compounded political instability. Continuous warfare in Aurangzeb's later years had strained agrarian production. The Jagirdari crisis intensified as available land assignments dwindled relative to expanding noble ranks. Corruption proliferated. Peasants bore heavier burdens, fueling rural unrest. Meanwhile, European trading companies expanded their commercial networks. The British East India Company, French Compagnie des Indes, and Dutch VOC secured fortified trading posts along India's coasts. Initially subordinate to Mughal authority, these companies leveraged political fragmentation to negotiate favorable terms. Their cannons guarded warehouses, but their ambitions remained largely commercial for now. Amid this fragmentation, the symbolic authority of the Mughal emperor retained residual prestige. Coins continued to bear imperial names. Friday sermons invoked the sovereign. Yet symbolism without coercive capacity erodes gradually. The most devastating blow came from beyond India's frontiers. In 1739, Nader Shah of Persia invaded. Exploiting Mughal weakness, he defeated imperial forces at Karnal and marched into Delhi. The sack of the city was catastrophic. Thousands were killed. The peacock throne and the Koh-i-Noor diamond were seized. The treasury was emptied. The invasion shattered illusions of invincibility. For centuries, the Mughal heartland had projected power outward. Now it lay exposed to foreign plunder. The psychological impact was as severe as the material loss. Provincial governors accelerated autonomy, recognizing the emperor's inability to protect the capital. Following Nader Shah's withdrawal, Ahmad Shah Durrani of Afghanistan launched repeated incursions into northwestern India. His campaigns further destabilized Punjab and the Gangetic Plain. The Third Battle of Panipat in 1761, fought between the Marathas and Durrani's forces, decimated Maratha power temporarily, but underscored the absence of effective Mughal leadership. During these decades, emperors reigned but rarely ruled. Muhammad Shah, often remembered as Rangeela for his patronage of arts and music, presided over decline masked by cultural vibrancy. Delhi's court remained a center of poetry and refinement even as political authority evaporated. The 18th century thus witnessed transformation from empire to mosaic. Hyderabad, Awadh, Bengal, Mysore, and the Maratha Confederacy functioned as quasi-independent states. The Mughal emperor in Delhi became a symbolic arbiter, occasionally consulted, increasingly ignored. European powers adapted swiftly to this environment. The British and French companies intervened in regional disputes, offering military support in exchange for commercial privileges. Their disciplined infantry, trained in European tactics and supported by artillery, began to outperform traditional Indian forces in localized conflicts. The Battle of Plassey in 1757, where Robert Clive defeated the Nawab of Bengal, marked a decisive turning point. Though technically a provincial event, its implications reverberated across the subcontinent. Bengal's immense revenues fell under British control, granting the East India Company unprecedented financial leverage. From Aurangzeb's vast dominion, the empire had devolved into fragmented sovereignties. Yet decline was not instantaneous collapse. Cultural life persisted. Trade networks endured. Agriculture continued. But the centralized vision that had once unified these elements faded into memory. The Mughal Empire had transitioned from conqueror to captive of circumstance. Internal factionalism, fiscal strain, regional assertion, and external invasion combined to erode authority. The machinery built by Akbar and expanded by Aurangzeb required cohesive leadership to function. In its absence, inertia prevailed. As the 18th century advanced, a new power dynamic emerged. The Mughal emperor still sat in Delhi's Red Fort, but real power increasingly resided in provincial courts. Empires often reach their greatest geographical extent just before their internal fractures begin to widen. Under Aurangzeb Alamgir, the Mughal Empire would stretch farther than ever before, from the mountains of Afghanistan to the deep south of the Deccan Plateau. Yet expansion would come at a cost so immense that the foundations laid by Babur and perfected by Akbar would begin to strain under their own weight. Aurangzeb did not inherit a fragile state, he inherited a colossus. His challenge was not to build magnificence, but to discipline it. In 1658, after a brutal war of succession, Aurangzeb crowned himself emperor. He adopted the title Alamgir, conqueror of the world. His ascent was forged in blood. Dara Shikoh executed, Murad eliminated, Shah Shuja defeated, and his father Shah Jahan imprisoned until death. The throne had been secured through uncompromising resolve. But such beginnings leave marks upon legitimacy. Aurangzeb's rule would always carry the shadow of fraternal destruction. Unlike his predecessors, Aurangzeb cultivated an image of personal austerity. He avoided excessive court ceremony, wore simple garments, and emphasized adherence to Islamic law. Where Akbar had experimented with spiritual synthesis, and Shah Jahan had celebrated aesthetic grandeur, Aurangzeb sought moral rectitude and orthodoxy. His reign marked a decisive shift in imperial tone. One of his early symbolic acts was the reimposition of the jizya tax on non-Muslims in 1679, reversing Akbar's policy. While its financial impact was limited, its symbolism resonated deeply. To some Muslim clerics, it restored proper order. To many Hindu subjects, it signaled a narrowing of imperial inclusivity. Aurangzeb also ordered the destruction or conversion of certain temples associated with rebellion, though such actions were often politically motivated rather than purely religious. Yet Aurangzeb's governance cannot be reduced to piety alone. He retained Hindu nobles in high office and continued the Mansabdari system. Rajputs still served in the imperial army. Administration functioned with bureaucratic continuity, but the atmosphere had shifted. The emperor saw himself as guardian of Islamic law, commissioning the Fatwa-i-Alamgiri, a comprehensive compilation of Hanafi jurisprudence. Military ambition dominated his reign. The Deccan, long contested, became his obsession. The sultanates of Bijapur and Golconda, once semi-autonomous under Mughal suzerainty, were targeted for direct annexation. Campaigns began in the 1660s and intensified over decades. By 1686, Bijapur fell. In 1687, Golconda was subdued. The Mughal Empire now extended across most of the Indian subcontinent. But conquest did not bring peace. The Deccan proved vast, resistant, and costly to administer. Guerrilla warfare flourished under the leadership of the Marathas. At their center rose a charismatic figure, Shivaji Bansal. Shivaji, born into a Maratha noble family, had carved out an independent kingdom in western India. Agile, strategic, and deeply attuned to local terrain, he challenged Mughal authority with swift raids and fortified hill strongholds. In 1666, Aurangzeb summoned Shivaji to court in Agra. The meeting ended in humiliation and house arrest for the Maratha leader. Shivaji escaped dramatically and resumed resistance with renewed vigor. By 1674, Shivaji crowned himself Chhatrapati, formalizing Maratha sovereignty. Even after his death in 1680, the Maratha movement intensified. Under leaders like Sambhaji and later Rajaram, they harassed Mughal supply lines, captured territories, and exploited the empire's overextension. What Aurangzeb envisioned as final consolidation became an exhausting quagmire. For over 25 years, the emperor personally directed Deccan campaigns, relocating the imperial court southward. Northern administration weakened in his prolonged absence. Revenue collection faltered. Mansabdars struggled to secure profitable jagirs. The empire's military machine, once precise and formidable, became stretched across immense distances. Simultaneously, unrest simmered elsewhere. In the northwest, Afghan tribes resisted imperial authority. In Punjab, the Sikh community evolved from a spiritual fellowship into a militarized resistance under Guru Gobind Singh. Tensions escalated following the execution of Guru Tegh Bahadur in 1675. The Khalsa, founded in 1699, embodied a new militant identity. Though not yet a territorial state, Sikh resistance signaled emerging regional assertion. The Rajputs, once pillars of Mughal stability, grew uneasy. Aurangzeb's interference in the succession of Marwar after the death of Raja Jaswant Singh sparked rebellion. The ensuing conflict alienated former allies. The delicate alliance forged by Akbar began to fray. Economically, prolonged warfare drained the treasury. The empire's agrarian base remained productive, but military expenditures ballooned. Corruption increased as officials struggled to meet revenue demands. The Mansabdari system, reliant on continuous land assignments, suffered from scarcity of fertile jagirs. Discontent spread among nobles whose expectations exceeded available resources. Aurangzeb's personal discipline could not compensate for structural strain. His vision of moral governance clashed with the pragmatic pluralism that had underpinned Mughal integration. Yet he remained relentless. Even into his 80s, he supervised campaigns from tents in the Deccan, writing letters expressing fatigue and spiritual reflection. In one poignant letter to his son, Aurangzeb lamented the burdens of kingship, acknowledging that he came alone into the world and would depart alone. The conqueror who had expanded the empire to its greatest size sensed the weight of impermanence. By the time of his death in 1707, the Mughal Empire encompassed nearly the entire Indian subcontinent. No rival matched its territorial scale, yet beneath this vastness lay exhaustion. Continuous warfare had hollowed administrative efficiency, regional identities strengthened, military discipline eroded. The emperor's authority, though formidable, depended increasingly on force rather than consensus. Aurangzeb was buried in a modest grave in Kuldabad, according to his wishes, a stark contrast to the marble mausoleums of his predecessors. His life symbolized devotion and determination. His legacy remains fiercely debated. Was he the last great Mughal or the architect of decline? The empire he left behind was immense but unstable. Succession once again loomed. Unlike the era of Akbar's consolidation or Shah Jahan's splendor, the coming decades would not be defined by visionary expansion, but by fragmentation. As Aurangzeb's sons prepared to contest the throne, centrifugal forces gathered strength. The Marathas were emboldened. The Sikhs were mobilizing. Regional governors tasted autonomy. European trading companies, still minor players, observed shifting dynamics carefully. The Mughal Empire had reached its zenith of territory and the edge of sustainability. Expansion had brought glory but also overstretch. Discipline had preserved order, yet alienated allies. Now, without Aurangzeb's iron will, the machinery of empire would confront its own inertia. The question that once asked whether a Timurid exile could found a dynasty had transformed. By the middle of the 18th century, the Mughal Empire existed more in memory than in command. Its emperor still occupied the Red Fort in Delhi. His seal still adorned decrees. Poets still invoked his name in flowing Persian verse. Yet beyond the capital's fading splendor, power had shifted irreversibly. The subcontinent had become a chessboard of regional states and foreign companies. The question was no longer whether the Mughal Empire could recover its former glory, but whether it could survive at all in a new age of gunpowder capitalism and maritime ambition. The transformation was subtle at first. The British East India Company, established for trade, expanded its influence not through imperial proclamations but through contracts, alliances, and calculated interventions. Its representatives were merchants, but its warehouses were fortified and its ships armed. Following the Battle of Plassey in 1757 and the subsequent victory at Buxar in 1764, the company secured the Diwani, the right to collect revenue in Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. This grant was issued in the name of the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II. On paper, imperial sovereignty remained intact. In reality, the emperor depended on company protection. Revenue that once flowed to Delhi now passed through British hands. Authority had inverted. The emperor legitimized the company, and the company financed the emperor. Shah Alam II's reign symbolized imperial humiliation. In 1788, the Rohilla chieftain Ghulam Qadir briefly seized Delhi, blinding the emperor and plundering the palace. The Mughal sovereign, once arbiter of kings, became hostage to shifting warlords. Protection eventually came from the Marathas, not from imperial armies. The Maratha Confederacy, having recovered after the devastation of Panipat in 1761, expanded across central and northern India. They occupied Delhi in 1771 and restored Shah Alam II to nominal authority. Yet even they governed in the emperor's name while exercising real control themselves. The Mughal court had become ceremonial theater. Meanwhile, in the south, Mysore under Hyder Ali and later Tipu Sultan challenged British expansion. In Awadh and Hyderabad, regional rulers navigated fragile autonomy. The French Compagnie des Indes attempted to rival British influence but faltered after defeats in the Carnatic Wars. Gradually, the British East India Company emerged as the dominant European power in India. The company's rise was methodical. It combined military discipline, financial innovation, and political opportunism. Indian sepoys, trained in European drill, formed the backbone of its armies. Artillery superiority often determined outcomes against traditional cavalry-based forces. Diplomacy exploited rivalries among Indian states, forging alliances that isolated opponents. The Mughal emperor, increasingly marginalized, retained symbolic value. In 1803, during the Second Anglo-Maratha War, British forces under General Lake defeated Maratha troops and entered Delhi. Shah Alam II, elderly and blind, received the British as protectors. From that moment, the Mughal emperor became a pensioner of the company. The Red Fort, once epicenter of imperial command, transformed into a gilded cage. The emperor received stipends. His court maintained ritual, but decisions affecting the subcontinent were made in Calcutta and London. The East India Company governed vast territories while invoking Mughal legitimacy when convenient. Culturally, however, Delhi's court remained vibrant. Urdu poetry flourished under masters like Mir and later Ghalib. The synthesis of Persian and Indian traditions endured even as political authority dissolved. Architecture slowed, but literary expression thrived in the twilight of empire. In 1837, Bahadur Shah Zafar II ascended the throne. Poet, mystic, and reluctant monarch, Zafar embodied the empire's final transformation from ruling dynasty to cultural relic. He presided over a court of refinement but possessed no army, no treasury, no command. By the mid-19th century, British control extended across most of India. The company had annexed territories through conquest and the doctrine of lapse, absorbing states lacking male heirs. Discontent simmered among sepoys, dispossessed princes, peasants burdened by revenue demands, and traditional elites displaced by new legal systems. In 1857, the tension erupted. What began as a sepoy mutiny in Meerut ignited a broader uprising across northern India. Soldiers marched to Delhi, proclaiming Bahadur Shah Zafar as Emperor of Hindustan. For a brief, dramatic moment, the Mughal name rallied resistance against British rule. Zafar, elderly and hesitant, found himself thrust into rebellion's center. The uprising united diverse grievances, military, religious, economic, but lacked centralized coordination. British forces regrouped and laid siege to Delhi. The fighting was brutal, street by street, fortification by fortification. In September 1857, Delhi fell. The reprisals were devastating. Thousands were executed. Entire neighborhoods were cleared. Bahadur Shah Zafar was captured, tried, and exiled to Rangoon. His sons were executed near the Kuni Darwaza. With their deaths, the Mughal lineage effectively ended. In 1858, the British Crown formally dissolved the East India Company and assumed direct control over India. Queen Victoria was proclaimed Empress of India in 1876. The Mughal Empire, which had once spanned nearly the entire subcontinent, was extinguished not through gradual decay alone, but through decisive colonial takeover. The fall of the Mughals marked more than dynastic termination. It symbolized the transition from early modern empire to industrial imperialism. European maritime powers, driven by commerce and reinforced by industrial production, reshaped global hierarchies. The Mughal state, built upon agrarian revenue and cavalry tradition, could not compete with steamships and factory economies. Yet history resists simple narratives of failure. For over 3 centuries, the Mughal Empire had integrated vast territories, fostered cultural synthesis, and constructed administrative systems of remarkable sophistication. Its decline resulted not from singular moral weakness but from converging pressures: overextension, fiscal strain, regional assertion, technological disparity, and global transformation. When Bahadur Shah Zafar died in exile in 1862, he was buried in an unmarked grave. An empire may collapse politically, yet endure culturally long after its banners have fallen. When the British Crown absorbed India in 1858 and Bahadur Shah Zafar was sent into exile, the Mughal Empire ceased to exist as a sovereign state. But its influence did not vanish with the lowering of its standard. Instead, it diffused into language, architecture, cuisine, courtly etiquette, administrative habits, and collective memory. The empire that had once ruled through armies would now survive through inheritance. To understand the Mughal afterlife, one must look beyond the moment of 1857. The uprising that had briefly restored the emperor as symbolic leader was crushed with brutal efficiency. British retribution reshaped Delhi irrevocably. Entire neighborhoods were cleared. The Red Fort was partially demolished and repurposed as a military garrison. The old courtly elite dispersed, their patronage networks shattered. Yet cultural traditions rarely die in a single stroke. Urdu poetry, nurtured in Mughal courts, continued to flourish in new centers such as Lucknow and Hyderabad. The ghazal, refined under emperors, adapted to colonial realities. Poets mourned lost sovereignty while reimagining identity in a changing world. The Persian language, once dominant in administration, gradually yielded to English and vernacular tongues, but its literary imprint endured. Architecture stood as the most visible testament to Mughal permanence. The Taj Mahal, Jama Masjid, Humayun's tomb, and countless gardens remained untouched by political transition. British officials, paradoxically, became custodians of monuments built by rulers they had displaced. Restoration projects in the late 19th century reframed Mughal architecture as part of India's historical heritage rather than as relics of a rival power. Culinary traditions likewise survived. The fusion of Central Asian techniques with Indian spices had produced distinctive Mughlai cuisine, rich gravies, biryanis, kebabs, and breads that transcended dynastic boundaries. Courtly tastes migrated into urban households, embedding imperial refinement into everyday life. Administrative structures also carried Mughal DNA. The British retained elements of revenue assessment and district governance shaped during Akbar's reforms. The language of land rights and taxation echoed systems refined under Tadar Mahal. Even as colonial law introduced new frameworks, echoes of Mughal bureaucracy persisted in practice and terminology. Yet the psychological impact of Mughal decline influenced emerging nationalism. For many Indians in the 19th century, the memory of a unified empire under indigenous rule offered both pride and caution. Reformers debated whether the Mughal synthesis of cultures had represented inclusive governance or foreign dominance. The empire's legacy became contested terrain. British narratives often portrayed Mughal decline as inevitable decadence, justifying colonial intervention as modernization. Indian intellectuals countered by highlighting Mughal achievements in art, urban planning, and administration. The interpretation of Mughal history became intertwined with arguments about India's future. As railways spread and telegraphs connected distant provinces, the subcontinent entered a new technological era. Yet Mughal urban centers remained cultural anchors. Delhi, though diminished, retained symbolic weight. When the British decided in 1911 to shift the capital of British India from Calcutta to Delhi, they did so consciously, aligning their imperial authority with the city that had once embodied Mughal power. The Delhi Durbar of 1911, proclaiming King George V as Emperor of India, unfolded in ceremonial grandeur reminiscent of Mughal pageantry. The British adopted elements of imperial spectacle pioneered centuries earlier. Even in domination, they borrowed from the vocabulary of the empire they replaced. Nationalist movements in the late 19th and early 20th centuries invoked Mughal figures selectively. Some saw Akbar as a model of pluralistic governance. Others cited Aurangzeb as cautionary example of rigidity. The memory of the Mughal state informed debates about secularism, identity, and unity in a colonized land. When India achieved independence in 1947, the Mughal Empire was long gone, yet its imprint shaped the nation's landscape. The Red Fort became site of the Prime Minister's Independence Day address. Mughal gardens inspired public parks. Persianate aesthetics continued influencing art and cinema. Across Pakistan and Bangladesh as well, Mughal heritage remained integral to cultural identity. Lahore's Badshahi Mosque and Shalimar Gardens testified to shared history that transcended modern borders. The empire's legacy thus extended beyond the political map that replaced it. Historiography evolved over time. Early colonial scholars emphasized decline. 20th-century historians reevaluated Mughal institutions as sophisticated and adaptive. Contemporary scholarship recognizes both the empire's integrative achievements and its structural weaknesses. The Mughal afterlife also survives in global imagination. Tourists from around the world visit the Taj Mahal, often unaware of the complex political narrative that produced it. The monument stands as shorthand for India itself, symbol of romance detached from imperial context. In literature and film, Mughal emperors appear alternately as tragic heroes, tyrants, or visionaries. Their stories continue to captivate because they embody universal themes: ambition, love, betrayal, faith, and impermanence. Thus, while the empire as a governing entity ended in 1858, its cultural and symbolic presence endures into the 21st century. Few empires have left such an architectural and artistic legacy so deeply embedded within a nation's identity. History rarely grants empires the clarity of a single cause for decline. Instead, it reveals an intricate web of choices, pressures, innovations, and accidents that converge over time. The Mughal Empire's fall was not an abrupt collapse triggered by one ruler or one invasion. It was the cumulative result of structural tension meeting a transforming world. To understand its decline is to examine the anatomy of empire itself, how systems designed for expansion struggle to adapt to new realities. At its height under Aurangzeb, the Mughal Empire commanded nearly the entire Indian subcontinent. Its population numbered in the tens of millions. Its agrarian revenues sustained vast armies and monumental projects. Its administrative apparatus, refined under Akbar, organized land assessment and noble service with remarkable sophistication. Yet within this very strength lay seeds of vulnerability. The Mansabdari system, originally innovative, depended on continuous availability of productive land for Jagir assignments. As territorial expansion slowed and military ranks multiplied, competition intensified. Nobles struggled to extract sufficient revenue from assigned lands, encouraging short-term exploitation rather than long-term stability. The Jagirdari crisis weakened the reciprocal bond between emperor and elite. Fiscal strain compounded the problem. Aurangzeb's prolonged Deccan campaigns consumed enormous resources without generating proportional revenue. Warfare disrupted agriculture, reduced productivity, and diverted manpower. While conquest expanded territory, it did not automatically integrate administrative cohesion. Overextension stretched supply lines and diluted central oversight. Succession politics further destabilized continuity. The absence of primogeniture ensured that each imperial transition risked civil war. While this practice sometimes elevated capable rulers, it also normalized fratricide and factionalism. Nobles learned to hedge loyalties, undermining institutional stability. Religious policy, though often overstated in popular narratives, played a role in altering elite consensus. Akbar's broad inclusivity had integrated Rajputs and other Hindu elites into the imperial framework. Aurangzeb retained many non-Muslim officials but symbolically reasserted Islamic orthodoxy. This shift, combined with regional disputes such as the Marwar succession crisis, weakened the emotional cohesion of the ruling class. Regionalization emerged as both cause and consequence of decline. Provincial governors gained autonomy not solely out of rebellion, but due to necessity. Communication across vast distances was slow. As central enforcement weakened, local administrators assumed de facto independence while maintaining nominal loyalty. This decentralized adaptation allowed governance to continue, but it hollowed imperial authority. External pressures accelerated fragmentation. The invasions of Nader Shah in 1739 and Ahmed Shah Durrani thereafter demonstrated military vulnerability. The Mughal army, once cutting-edge with gunpowder artillery, lagged behind evolving tactics and organization elsewhere. Technological stagnation was less about ignorance than about institutional inertia. Meanwhile, global economic currents shifted. European maritime powers accessed Indian markets directly, circumventing overland trade routes that had enriched earlier empires. The influx of silver initially benefited Mughal commerce, but European companies gradually converted commercial presence into political leverage. Their military organization, disciplined infantry supported by mobile artillery, proved effective against decentralized regional forces. The Mughal state, built upon agrarian taxation and cavalry aristocracy, struggled to adapt to this emerging industrial commercial paradigm. It lacked a navy capable of projecting maritime power. It lacked centralized manufacturing comparable to Europe's industrializing economies. These limitations were not unique to the Mughals. Many early modern empires confronted similar transitions. Cultural flourishing during decline complicates simplistic narratives. 18th-century Delhi produced remarkable poetry, music, and scholarship. Regional courts patronized art and architecture. Economic activity continued in textiles and agriculture. Decline was political rather than civilizational. Yet political fragmentation created vulnerability to corporate imperialism. The East India Company's acquisition of revenue rights in Bengal provided unprecedented financial resources. Unlike regional rulers dependent on agrarian taxation, the company leveraged global credit networks. Its wars were financed by profits extracted from Indian territories themselves. The Mughal emperor's symbolic authority, once source of legitimacy, became tool for colonial manipulation. Grants issued in his name cloaked company expansion in veneer of continuity. When that symbolism ceased to serve British interests, it was discarded. The final blow in 1857 reflected accumulated grievances rather than sudden transformation. The uprising drew upon resentment among soldiers, dispossessed elites, and peasants affected by revenue reforms. The Mughal name offered rallying symbolism, but the empire lacked institutional capacity to lead resistance effectively. In analyzing Mughal decline, historians caution against monocausal explanations. Religious intolerance alone did not destroy the empire, nor did European superiority single-handedly determine its fate. Rather, the intersection of internal overextension, fiscal stress, elite factionalism, regional assertion, technological shifts, and global economic realignment eroded cohesion gradually. The Mughal experience illuminates a broader truth about empires. Systems optimized for conquest may falter when required to sustain equilibrium. Administrative brilliance can become rigid tradition. Military expansion can exhaust fiscal health. Cultural confidence can obscure emerging threats. Yet decline does not negate achievement. For over 3 centuries, the Mughal Empire shaped South Asia's political boundaries, artistic traditions, and cultural synthesis. Its integration of Persianate court culture with Indian social structures produced a civilization of remarkable vibrancy. Understanding its fall invites reflection on resilience and adaptability. Could reforms have prolonged its vitality? Might alternative succession mechanisms have stabilized governance? Would maritime investment have countered European encroachment? These questions remain speculative but instructive. As the 19th century ushered in colonial dominance, the Mughal Empire transitioned from actor to memory. But its narrative continues to inform debates about pluralism, authority, and statecraft. Empires rise from ambition and fall through complexity. The Mughal story exemplifies both arcs, a journey from Central Asian exile to subcontinental grandeur, from marble splendor to imperial twilight. Only one chapter remains, the reckoning of legacy. Empires fade, but they do not disappear. They dissolve into the landscapes they shaped, the languages they refined, the cities they built, and the memories they leave behind. The Mughal Empire, born from the ambition of an exiled Timurid prince, rose to command one of the richest and most diverse regions on earth. It fell not in a single cataclysm, but through the slow unraveling of cohesion in a world that was changing faster than it could adapt. Yet its legacy endures, complex, contested, luminous. To measure the Mughal Empire solely by its fall is to misunderstand its magnitude. For over 3 centuries, it provided political unity across vast territories of the Indian subcontinent. Its administrative framework stabilized revenue systems and integrated regional elites. Its courts fostered artistic synthesis unmatched in early modern Asia. Its rulers navigated the delicate balance between conquest and accommodation, forging a composite culture that blended Central Asian, Persian, and Indian traditions. Babur's audacity began the experiment. He carried with him memories of Samarkand and dreams of restoration. But in Hindustan, he planted something new, not a replica of Timurid dominion, but a dynasty shaped by Indian realities. His memoirs reveal a conqueror reflective enough to recognize that empire required more than force. It required adaptation. Humayun's exile underscored fragility. From Persia, he absorbed cultural influences that would later permeate Mughal art and architecture. His struggles demonstrated that dynastic survival depends on resilience as much as ambition. Akbar transformed conquest into consolidation. His genius lay not only in military victories but in integration. By incorporating Rajputs and other regional elites into imperial service, abolishing discriminatory taxes, and institutionalizing administrative reforms, he expanded the empire's legitimacy beyond sectarian identity. Under him, the Mughal state became an inclusive political organism rather than a transient occupation. Jahangir refined that organism, nurturing artistic excellence and diplomatic engagement. His court illustrated the empire's confidence, secure enough to patronize painters who captured minute details of birds and blossoms, secure enough to welcome foreign envoys with composed grandeur. Shah Jahan elevated Mughal expression into architectural transcendence. The Taj Mahal stands as testament not only to love but to imperial capacity, a vision of symmetry, harmony, and permanence carved into marble. His reign marked the aesthetic zenith of Mughal civilization. Aurangzeb extended the empire to its greatest territorial reach. His discipline and determination preserved authority through relentless campaigns. Yet the very expansion that magnified Mughal power also exhausted it. His reign illustrates the paradox of empire. Growth can weaken even as it glorifies. After him, the centrifugal forces long contained began to pull apart the imperial center. Regional states emerged, Nobles competed for diminishing resources. Foreign invasions exposed vulnerability. European companies exploited fragmentation. The Mughal emperor became symbolic rather than sovereign. And yet, even in decline, Mughal influence persisted. Language offers one of the clearest markers. Urdu, shaped within Mughal courts, became a vehicle of poetry and expression across South Asia. Its cadences carry echoes of Persian refinement and Indian resonance. Literary traditions forged under imperial patronage continue to inspire. Architecture remains perhaps the most visible inheritance. The Taj Mahal, Red Fort, Jama Masjid, and countless gardens draw millions each year. They anchor national identity and global imagination. These monuments remind modern observers that political power may fade, but artistic achievement can transcend centuries. Administrative legacies also endure. Systems of land assessment and record-keeping influence subsequent governance under colonial and post-colonial regimes. The concept of centralized authority overseeing diverse provinces left imprint on later statecraft. Culinary traditions, fragrant biryanis, rich curries, delicate sweets, reflect the fusion that characterized Mughal courts. Cultural synthesis, rather than purity, defined the empire's creativity. Yet legacy is not free from debate. For some, the Mughal period symbolizes cosmopolitan integration. For others, it represents foreign domination. Interpretations shift with political climates and contemporary concerns. The empire's memory becomes a mirror reflecting present anxieties and aspirations. What lessons, then, does the Mughal story offer? First, that adaptability determines endurance. Akbar's willingness to integrate diverse elites strengthened the empire. Rigidity, whether administrative or ideological, narrowed its resilience. Second, that expansion carries inherent limits. Aurangzeb's campaigns demonstrate how territorial ambition can overextend fiscal and military capacity. Empire requires balance between growth and consolidation. Third, that legitimacy rests not solely on power but on perception. The Mughal emperor commanded loyalty when subjects saw themselves reflected in imperial identity. When that reflection dimmed, cohesion weakened. Fourth, that cultural achievement can outlive political authority. The Mughal Empire's monuments and artistic contributions remain integral to South Asian heritage long after the dynasty's fall. Finally, the Mughal experience underscores a universal truth about human endeavor. Permanence is illusion. Even the mightiest structures, whether marble mausoleums or administrative systems, exist within currents of time that no ruler fully controls. In 1857, as Bahadur Shah Zafar departed Delhi for exile, he reportedly lamented that he did not even receive 2 yards of land for burial in his homeland. His sorrow encapsulated the empire's trajectory, from sovereign of a subcontinent to displaced relic of history. Yet today, his poetry is recited, his memory preserved. The dynasty he represented remains embedded in collective consciousness. The Mughal Empire's arc, exile, ascent, splendor, strain, fragmentation, memory, mirrors the life cycle of empires across civilizations. It invites reflection not only on India's past, but on the nature of power itself. Marble domes gleam under shifting sunlight. Gardens once designed to evoke paradise still bloom each spring. Tourists trace intricate inlays with their eyes, unaware of the wars and debates that made them possible. In these enduring forms, the Mughal Empire speaks across centuries. It speaks of ambition that refused obscurity, of rulers who sought order in diversity, of artists who carved eternity from stone, of a state that rose from displacement to dominion and then receded into memory. History does not preserve empires intact. It preserves their influence, reshaped, reinterpreted, reborn in new contexts. The Mughal Empire, though politically extinguished, remains culturally alive. Its story reminds us that greatness is measured not only by duration of rule, but by depth of imprint.